Hello and welcome to the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. Liam, it is officially Championship Day. How are you doing?
All good. I'm sure we'll go through it, but I'm happy with my finals performances. However, my playoff performances can be a little more to be desired.
You're teasing.
You?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. You're teasing the first segment, so yeah, I'll leave that one. But yeah, I'm good. Happy New Year to listeners. If you're watching along on the live stream, eagle-eyed viewers will have realised we are joined by a guest. So delighted to have with us. So he's 1/4 of the 5 Yard Dynasty team. He is the author of the Tomorrow Star Today series. You will find him at Lewiswood FF_UK. And by that name, I'm sure you've worked out it is Lewis. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you, mate. Thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to join you guys, and especially as we reach kind of the end of the season and we reach prime Dynasty season.
This is it. It was amazing to me how many league chats. I don't know if you were the same today. It was like, oh yeah, looking forward to a break, looking forward to switching off. I was like, no, I'm so excited. This is where the season starts. You know, I get to start talking rookies. I get to start looking at trades and analysing rosters. And yeah, I'm very excited and very much looking forward to the next few months.
I've been planning my film sessions already, and I've still not even started my first one yet. I've been planning them for the past month. How can people be having a break?
So Lewis, I think this is your second appearance on the podcast now. Am I right in saying that?
I think we're at 3 now. I was on
one
3? When you were away.
Apologies.
When you were slacking, Rich.
Yeah, I forgot that. Yeah. Right. So it's your match ball pod. So I apologise because I've not got your match ball ready. So we'll have to save that for after 90 minutes. But for the guys that have missed the previous two, tell us a bit about yourself. How long you been kind of playing fantasy football?
So this is actually only my 3rd season. I got into the NFL about 5 years ago or so. I'm a Rams fan. I think you can just about see on my hat. I'm a Rams fan, and yeah, started playing fantasy 3 years ago. Fell in love instantly. This has been my first year creating content with you guys, and which is an opportunity I'm really grateful for, and I've really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, looking forward to kind of what the off-season can bring as well.
And how did you find that kind of step from fan into playing fantasy into kind of producing content?
Well, it's been really interesting because playing in a lot of home leagues and having very, very supportive friends means that I can't really get away with anything, because I would post an article. What I would have to get into the trend of doing, particularly with Tomorrow Star Today, because it's trying to kind of predict trends and get in while the value's a little bit lower. So I would have to message a league mate about a trade, make the trade happen, and then I could send you my article afterwards, because otherwise the price would skyrocket. It happened with Elijah Moore that I sent a message and they said, I've just read your article, so no, I like him even more now.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. I know certainly me and Liam have talked. I've sent through several trade offers whilst we're recording the pod, so hopefully people accept before the pod goes live. But
we all need to adopt pseudonyms like they did back in the 1800s when the US Civil War was going on. We need pseudonyms.
So maybe we just need pen names. That's it. Maybe we need to start writing articles under different names.
You guys both have a pen name.
This is very true. Yeah. To be fair, I think more people know me by my pen name than perhaps my real name. So yeah, maybe that's where I'm going down. But Liam, we've made the people wait long enough. Come on, cocktail of the week. What you got for us?
So you can't actually see it if you're on the live stream. This is a tiki mug that my girlfriend bought me. So
I thought that was a Lion King mug then. But
no, okay. It's not. It's close. I'll give you that. It is a zombie. So to make it, all you need is rum, pineapple juice, lime juice, and grenadine. Shake it up really well. Get a bit of froth on the top, and it tastes really good.
You must be working your way through that bottle of grenadine. It seems like it makes an appearance every week, Liam.
Yeah, there's only like this much left if you're on the live stream, and for audio listeners, probably like less than a thumb.
But basically, he's going to need to buy a new bottle next week because he's not got enough.
Yeah.
Right. So before we dive into the main content for today, keen to remind you that support for the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, who are the best in men's below the waist grooming. We have an exclusive offer for you with 20% off and free worldwide shipping when you use that code 5Yard. Liam, so before we dive in, I guess we should probably introduce and explain what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. So the reason we've got Lewis on is that over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be reviewing and breaking down kind of the positional, I guess, season in review as such. So today we're starting with running backs. We're going to do wide receivers next week, and then we're going to do a quarterbacks tight ends pod in one. But before we get to that, you teased it earlier, Liam. How did your season go?
Personally, could have been better, but it could have been a lot worse with how the season's gone. So all in all, I made it to 3 finals and won all 3. So if we break it down, I'm sure people will most likely want to listen to the dynasty aspect of my season. I don't think you really care if you're listening to this podcast or live stream. If you're listening to the redraft, probably got the wrong one. So dynasty wise, I'm in 9 in total with 4 best ball leagues. I made the playoffs in 6 of them, excluding the best ball leagues, because I don't want to, because it's kind of weird, isn't it? Some best ball leagues have a playoff, some don't. And I know Tom, UK best ball guy, that me and Rich both get on the pod every year and definitely have a good couple of interactions with. He doesn't like playoffs at all, so I decided not to include them just to please him. So yeah, out of the 9 leagues, I made playoffs in 6. I'm in the rebuild in 2 and just missed out in 1. And then I made it to 2 finals out of those 6 and won both of them.
Solid. And Lewis, I know we spoke before we came on. I'm very jealous of your season results, but how did you do for the listeners?
Yeah, weirdly similar to Liam. 8 leagues total, 6 of them playoffs. The 2 that I missed, one's a massive rebuild, which Rich commissions, and will have seen me blowing up the team midway through the season.
I'd like to dive in there and say, I believe the first time you came in the pod, we talked about not going win now immediately, and I think that was a case in point, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think starting up with like Zeke and Julio wasn't particularly great with how they ended up doing in the season. But also Cam Akers was my 3rd pick in the startup.
Yeah.
But I'm going in with I think either 3 or 4 firsts and a wide receiver core of like Cup, AJ Brown, Amari Cooper, Michael Thomas. So it should be fine.
You're set up nicely.
Yeah. But then the other one that I missed the playoffs, I was the top scorer and finished 7th. Because fantasy football is a cruel mistress. Of those, I got to 3 finals and I won all 3 of them.
Fantastic.
Nice.
And then my performance. So I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm obviously in a lot more leagues than both of you. Which, we'll take that as you wish. But I'm in 37 leagues. I made 21 playoff appearances, which I was pretty pleased with. Only 9 final appearances, and then of those 9 finals, I actually won 7 titles. So yeah, it was a pleasing day for me today. I've had a smile on my face all day. So yeah, quite pleased with my my overall. I think it's about 20% of leagues that I won in. So pretty chuffed with that. Liam, did you have some significant news before we dive into our running back review?
So we had a couple of things. It's week 17, so there's not much going on. And I didn't really want to bring up anything that was going to affect this season only because it's over for most leagues. So first of all, some sad news for Michael Gallup. He has torn his ACL. He could affect his off-season value. I know that I was a big believer in picking him up for about a second. That value's definitely gone down now. It could mean that he signs a cheaper deal with the Cowboys. It could. I don't know how you feel about that, Rich, or Lewis. Bring both in there.
I think to me, obviously, it's any significant injury is never good news. I think it's likely that he's probably going to miss training camp, which to me means, it sounds weird, but if he moves team, I'll probably drop him a little bit more. I was very excited that he was going to sign a big deal and find a new home. But I do think, as you said, this probably means that he's more likely to return with Dallas. not need to have training camp, should be good to go for September week 1, and hopefully probably sign like a 1-year prove-it deal, and then can hit free agency next year. I mean, Lewis, do you think he's still a kind of a good buy now before free agency, or?
I think what it does is it raises the floor and lessens the ceiling from my view of Gallup. Wide receivers that move teams in free agency historically don't do particularly well the first year, especially if we look at this last year. The only one who was really a success was like Kendrick Bourne, and even then, I mean, I know we spoke about him, but it's not a huge success, is it? So what it does is it keeps him in the situation that we're more aware of. It means that the price is going to be more stable for Gallup than it is if you were to buy him before a potential big move somewhere. But it means that we know the situation he's staying in, and we know that he can be a bit of a boom bust wide receiver 3, but we know that it's a crowded wide receiver room, and potentially with a tight end as well. So it means he's still the player that he was previously. It just means he doesn't really change in my rankings too much, but massive shame for him, because I think he was about to be one of the prize targets in free agency.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did put this on the list, and it's not happened yet, but AB, Antonio Brown, had a little hissy fit by the looks of it halfway through the second quarter of his game on Sunday. And he was essentially released from the books on the sideline, but that transaction still has not gone through. So it's not official from the point of view that he's hit waivers. However, it doesn't sound like he's going to be playing for the Bucks anytime soon.
I don't think we should spend too much time on this, because
I just wanted to point it out. That's all.
The guy's an idiot. The guy's done. I can't see any team giving him a chance. Quite frankly, I think his career's over. Yeah. It's a shame. One of the most exciting, interesting to watch guys I've ever had the joy of watching, but a complete tool. And let's leave it there.
So, last bit of news that I wanted to bring up. If you didn't see, for whatever reason, I have no idea how you missed it, what rock you're living under, I don't know. But Jamar Chase had a 50 burger in PPR, and that is insane. Now, I only wanted to put this on here because 50 burgers don't really happen in fantasy football for a single player often. But I wanted to ask you both a question. We'll go to Lewis first. Is he your now Dynasty wide receiver 1?
Yeah, he is. It was always between him and Justin Jefferson, and I think I'm looking at the situation being more stable for Chase. And we've seen that he can produce with other talent there. I love the talent of the two of them. And I was actually not particularly high on Chase coming in, but I've been proven very, very wrong. And so, yeah, he's my number 1 overall Dynasty wide receiver at the moment.
Rich?
Not for me. Not for me. I'm still sticking with Justin Jefferson. I think that for me, he's had a longer track record in the NFL, and I appreciate that's tough for Jamar Chase to have done it more, considering this is his rookie year. But yeah, I just think that Justin Jefferson's had a better year. I think that I buy into him being the true one in that offense, whereas I think that Chase is kind of a 1A, 1B situation with Higgins. We saw over the last 4 weeks that Higgins came to the fore and Jamar Chase was basically putting up duds. So I think I'd still lean Justin Jefferson. I would say they are very much in a top tier of 3, and I'd be happy with any of those 3. If you're going to give me Justin Jefferson plus anything for Jamar Chase, I'd absolutely take that. And I'm sure I'm not shocking the listeners by saying I'd throw CeeDee Lamb in that mix as well.
Surprise, surprise. The only thing I'd say to Chase is he did break Justin Jefferson's receiving yards record in the same amount of times as what Justin Jefferson put it up in. He didn't need the extra game this year, so he is definitely a top asset. However, it just depends. For me, I've got Justin Jefferson just ahead of him. But yeah, it's very close between the two right now.
Sorry, go on, Liz.
I love the two. It's obviously, it's no slight on Jefferson. It's looking at and going, Jamar Chase outperformed him in college. He's come into the NFL and outperformed him in his rookie year. So I think that's my argument of putting him ahead. He was clearly the more dominant receiver in college when they played on the same team at LSU. So I think that's the argument. Is I think he's outperforming in year one, and so I see the room for development if he continues to develop the same as Justin Jefferson. And also, we have no idea what the Vikings are starting at quarterback next year. I would hedge my bets on it not being Kirk Cousins.
If I can guarantee it's going to be Kirk Cousins.
I was about to say that.
Go and have a look at his contract. There is absolutely no way they'll like anyone else other than Kirk Cousins. They're not paying him. I think it's like 35, 36 million. They're not paying him that not to do anything but start for them. So I think for me, the one difference I have with Jefferson and Chase is I think that Jamar Chase's ceiling on a week-to-week basis is definitely higher, and I completely get that. And if you look at the season-long stats, they're similar. But for me, Justin Jefferson has a higher target share, is likely to have a higher target volume, and that leads to a safer week-to-week play. Justin Jefferson has finished as a top 24 receiver 12 times this year, whereas Jamar Chase has finished as a top 24 receiver only 7 times. So over half the games, Jamar Chase has basically disappointed for you on a week-to-week basis. And that's where I'd lean Justin Jefferson, just because I think that because of the target volume, he's got is a safer week-to-week play.
Come on then, Rich. Let's move on, because if we don't, we'll be stuck on that question for the whole show.
Save that for the wide receiver show next week. So the as we hinted, the idea is we're basically going to do a dynasty positional review. So what we're going to look through is the kind of top 12 in the season finish, plus also 5 kind of, I guess, honourable mentions who are in the top 12 in terms of points per game. We're literally going to work through a list. We're going to talk about them, their performance, where they were before the season, what we think about their kind of dynasty value moving forward, and that kind of thing. So to kick us off, Lewis, the August ADP running back 2, I think in redraft he was sort of RB6-ish, but a very dominant RB1 finish was Jonathan Taylor. What do you make of what has been a fairly incredible season?
It sort of goes without saying, Jonathan Taylor's an unbelievable player in a fantastic situation behind a pretty dominant O-line. And we sort of knew that the dynasty value was going to skyrocket. I always thought the redraft price was a little bit low, so I ended up with him anywhere that I was drafting in the back of the first, which has definitely been the key to a couple of titles. A really interesting thing for me about him, and obviously I adore the player and the talent. If you don't already own him in Dynasty, I don't think you're going to. The price is so ridiculously high that even if you were to offer, your RB1, even if it's, say Najee or Swift, who are ranked as the 2 and 3 currently, and another bona fide wide receiver 1, you might still not get him. And whilst I think he's incredibly dominant and such an elite talent, I'm never willing to blow up my entire team like that just for one player. So I think if you picked him up at the 101 or 102 last year, if the person ahead of you took Clyde, well done you, enjoy. Other than that, I think you're going to have to sit and watch him be dominant on someone else's team.
Yeah, he's definitely approached that kind of 4-1 territory, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Liam, I talk constantly about peak value. Do you think that now's the opportunity to sell Jonathan Taylor, or do you think that you'd hold and expect another RB1 performance next year?
Normally, I'd agree with your peak value stance. However, I don't think that this is his peak value. As crazy as that sounds, I don't think it is. Yes, he is the first running back and off the board in current ADP. Yes, he has just had the RB1 season, but I don't think that he slows down next year. And if you can sell him next year, that's peak value, because I don't foresee him having a worse year than he has had this year. So I don't know where you want to go with that, Rich, but I think if you're trying to buy him, good luck, because as Lewis said, you're probably looking at 4 firsts, if not blowing up your entire team just to get one player. He is a younger Christian McCaffrey, and we know how expensive Christian McCaffrey was.
I think I foresee him having a kind of Christian McCaffrey-like reign on the RB1 spot. I think we're going to see him be RB1 for the next probably 2.5 years. if you ask me this question again in a year, 18 months time, as we're approaching the end of that first contract, that's probably when I'm selling. But this is a guy coming off his second year. I know that we talk about approaching that second contract. I still think you've got a year or 18 months to hold him before you look and sell. That being said, if someone is willing to offer me 5 firsts plus, or some sort of ridiculous offer, then yeah, I'm absolutely if I can completely transform my roster by selling Jonathan Taylor, then absolutely I'm doing that. If I can get someone like a Javonte Williams and 3 firsts or something like that, I'm smashing that all day. But yeah, it needs to be essentially a big overpay for me to be hit and accept. So the RB2 on the season, I guess probably a little bit of a surprise to most people, because in August he was the RB15 in Dynasty value, was Austin Eckler, who also finished as the RB3 in points per game. So not just kind of a compiler. Averaged 21 points a game, Lewis. Do you think that he can keep this up and have another season of elite production?
Yeah, Eckler was actually someone I'm really happy to have been right on going into the season. He was someone that I bought in a couple of places and definitely a redraft target. So it was nice to, one championship winning team saw me start off with JT and Eckler as my RB1 and 2, which was pretty nice. I think Eckler is one that you can have for next year. He's, because of his start to the league, he didn't see too much work on his rookie deal, and he was a UDFA as well, so it's worked slightly differently. But as a receiving back, his floor is slightly higher, and it means that he's getting run into the ground slightly less. So he's got a little bit more of a lifespan to him. I think he's going into his age 26 season, so this is normally the time that we look to sell. I think you can have him for another year. I think he'll repeat next year. That offense is definitely something that I want a part of, especially as they develop with another year with Brandon Staley and whatever they end up doing with at the wide receiver position. But I like the weapons on the team. I think you can buy him and hold for another year and expect similar production. After that, it would start to concern me, just because that's the trend for when running backs start to have a downturn, regardless what kind of running backs they are normally.
Yeah, I think that for me, he's one of these players that I don't think's name value is ever going to match the production because of, and you hint at the UDFA nature of his kind of start in the NFL. I think that, as I said, he was the RB15 in August. In the December DLF ADP, he was the RB9. Yet this is a guy that's got 2 years left on his contract, and to be honest, yes, the Chargers can cut him, but when they're paying him $6.5 million, I can't foresee them moving on from that contract at all. So yeah, I think that's a good hold as such. I do think that as part of his production as well, he wasn't just a receiving back. He had 25 rushing attempts inside the 10 this year, which resulted in 10 touchdowns. He is that complete all-round 3-down back that gets, the first and second down carries. He gets all the targets in the passing game, and he gets the goal line work. I don't see why you wouldn't love Austin Eckler, other than, as you said, potentially that age piece. I mean, Liam, do you think that he's still a target for you, even at that RB9 price, or do you think that that's kind of a little bit rich where perhaps you'd like to move off?
No, I prefer the RB9 price to anything that I'd get for him. So just looking back on his previous seasons, he had injuries last year. So he only played 10 games. He was the PPR running back 26. But then the year before, he scored 4 less points than he's currently on in the same span. And he was the RB4 in PPR. I think
that was sharing a backfield with Melvin Gordon that year as well.
I thought that was the year before. Wasn't that the holdout year? Maybe
that was So that was two years ago where he shared a backfield for 6 or 8 games. I can't remember.
But that's still insane for me to be getting that type of running back at RB9. I'd take that any day of the week. If he's your running back too, you're laughing all the way to the playoffs. I as Lewis said, he was on him before the season. So was I. I said that he was a screaming value at running back 15 for someone that finished as a top 5 running back, and he just smashed it with a top 2 finish. yes, you could say that Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey have been injured and blah, 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 but he still put up the PPG to know what you're getting in him. And he's tied to a quarterback, a very young and very good quarterback, one that I was wrong on this year, in Justin Herbert, for another 3 years on his contract. Yes, the final year they could save about $6 million to cut him, or probably about $5 million to cut him, sorry. But I still really like him for another year. And as Louis said, if you want to hold him for a year and then sell him after next year, you're still probably getting better value than you're getting right now.
I think if you're selling him in a year, I think you're not going to get a return on the investment. I think if you're wanting to sell, you need to sell now. But I still think even if you sell now, you're selling him for less than his actual production is worth, if that makes sense. As I said, I genuinely believe that because of the undrafted free agent nature, because he's not that sexy high drafted pick, I really believe that basically his production is always going to outweigh his value. So for me, I think he's always going to be a good buy candidate, and I think he's always going to be a hold because, as we said, he's finished as the RB2. He's averaged over 20 points a game, and yet he's currently the RB9. Like that's crazy to me. So the guy who finished as the RB3, it feels like he's been teasing a breakout for a few years. He finally broke out, and that was Joe Mixon. Lewis, I think you were a little bit lower than consensus coming into the year on Mixon. Has that fully done a 180 now?
Yeah, it wasn't just that I was a little bit lower than consensus. Mixon was actually one of the names on my do not draft list, which is something I'll always put together, only for redraft, because I'd been let down by him too many times before. But we always knew that the talent was there if he could stay healthy. And this year he did, and he's looked unbelievable in the process. I think helps as well with the weapons that the Bengals have, that he's going to see some slightly lighter boxes, and also going to get more red zone opportunities. But someone that I was very, very low on coming into the season, and then, completely changed course across the course of it, is currently ranked as my RB7 for Dynasty. Again, I think potentially could be a sell at this point, just because this is the outlier season for him. And so it might be that it's a sell high moment. But I couldn't blame people for going out to try and buy in the hope that this becomes the norm for him.
Yeah, I think his current value, honestly, absolutely shocked me. I know Liam and I spoke 4 or 5 weeks ago when the December ADP got released by DLF, and the fact that he was the RB4, I was completely gobsmacked by. Admittedly, I think the RB4 is perhaps the toughest spot in all of rankings to rank at the moment. I don't think there's a good RB4. But yeah, I was gobsmacked that it was him. I mean, Liam, do you think that he can have a big enough piece in that offense? You know, we talked about Jamar Chase earlier. We've still got Tyler Boyd floating around. We've got T. Higgins. Could the Bengals spending some more assets on that offensive line mean that Joe Mixon has an even higher ceiling next year?
Yeah, so I really struggle with Mixon because, as Louis said, it's the first year that he's actually done what we expected him to do. And when I say expected, I mean 2 years ago we expected this type of production, not now.
5 years ago we expected this production.
Speak for yourself, Rich. But I think with Mixon, I struggle to put him in a top tier because of the letdown that we've had over the past few years before this one. Again, he's tied to Joe Burrow, a very young quarterback, a very good young quarterback, for a good another 2 years before cap hit or the savings become ridiculously easy to just cut a player. So I think, again, Mixon, I could basically copy and paste what I said for Eckler, but I'm a little bit more wary with Mixon because the Bengals have shown that they are happy to use a second back in that backfield. And I'm not sure whether it was the fact that this year we just didn't have that back. Like some RJP Ryan isn't going to come in and take Joe Mixon's work when he's playing that well. But if they draft a low-end running back, let's think of a Kenneth Gainwell from this draft, for example, that sort of caliber. And yes, Rich, I see you laughing.
shock the guy that you suggest there.
I mean, he was the first running back in like the fifth beyond round that I thought of. So, yeah, if they draft someone like that, are they going to see a bit of the work and see that snap share steadily increase like they did with Gio Bernard? Maybe this is the year that has proven to Zach Taylor that Mixon can handle that workload when he's healthy. But yeah, I think that he's a top 10 for me right now. I've got him at RB 10 exactly. So I like it, but I don't know whether I'd be drafting him anywhere near the RB4 right now.
I think what's quite interesting, actually, talking about Eckler and Mixon and talking about the shares of other running backs in the backfield, is the difference of when those running backs tend to be brought in. So Samaje Perine tended to be brought in on third downs, which is obviously slightly more valuable fantasy work. Whereas Joshua Kelly and Justin Jackson tended to be brought in to spell Austin Eckler on early downs. So there's potentially some value to look at there in terms of the fact of the way the teams see them, that Joe Mixon is actually losing a bit of the more valuable work in the passing game, whereas Austin Eckler is just being spelled slightly to save his legs.
Yeah, you've stolen a point I was about to make there, Lewis.
Sorry.
No, not at all. It teased me up quite nicely. So Joe Mixon was actually the only running back in the top 6 that didn't average a 10% plus target share. So Jonathan Taylor, Austin Eckler, and the next 3 that we're going to mention all had over a 10% target share, whereas Joe Mixon was down at 9.4%.
In Mixon's defense, the only thing I'd say to that is I don't think any of the teams, that you could probably argue one of the next 3 players have a better wide receiver core than the Bengals do right now.
Absolutely, but that all needs to be taken into account moving forward.
I'm not saying anything against your point. I'm just saying we need to take that into consideration.
So the RB4 this season, he is the consensus RB2 in terms of dynasty circles. Lewis, I know you're a little bit lower in terms of dynasty value, and that's Najee Harris. What is it that makes you not a Najee believer?
I think the main thing for me, and I tweeted about this the other day, and I actually ended up with some Steelers fans in my mentions telling me about how fantastic Najee is as a player. I think what it is for me, so before the game yesterday, he'd had 268 rushing attempts for 984 yards, which is a yards per carry of 3.7, which is pretty bad. I know it's a terrible O-line. A lot of Najee's value this year has come from having an incredibly immobile quarterback whose arm had the strength of a wet sausage, and he couldn't throw it more than 10 yards down the field. And so he was getting an incredible amount of work in terms of dump-offs and also in terms of obviously the early down rushing work. Najee hasn't quite shown me enough in terms of his individual talent that I think a lot of it comes down to volume. And I think when you see that much volume, and actually it's an interesting thing when you look at Derrick Henry as well in terms of the carries, eventually you're going to see fantasy production if you're carrying the ball 20 times a game and getting 10 dump-offs. You just are. I haven't quite seen enough from Najee to make me think that he's a top 5 dynasty running back just yet, so I'm not really buying into the price. The other thing, and I did tweet this out, through 16 games, he would have been only the 3rd player in the last 5 seasons to have over 250 rushing attempts, but not hit 1,000 yards. And there were 26 players who did hit that mark. So it's just a bit of a concern for me, especially going into a bit of instability for the Steelers next year. Who knows who's going to be their quarterback with Big Ben retiring? It probably looks like either a rookie or a terrible option that's already in-house. So the offense worries me a little bit. It mostly means that whilst I'm a little bit lower on Najee, and I don't begrudge anyone who has him ranked in that RB2 or 3 spot, I can see the argument. I'm not buying into it because I don't quite see it yet.
Well, it's a good job you don't begrudge anyone, because both me and Rich have him as our RB3. So
yeah,
that would be a very awkward saying.
I'll be honest with you, Lewis. I was where you were probably 2 weeks ago, and I was not willing to believe it. I didn't particularly like some of the stats I was seeing, I didn't particularly like what I was seeing from a game perspective. And then I dived into it in a little bit more detail. And I think actually he massively outproduced what that offense kind of allowed. And yes, he saw an insane volume, and that was what led him. But as Liam will tell you, yards per carry for me is an offensive line stat, not a running back stat. And I think that shows that the Steelers' offensive line is woeful, and I think it's only going to improve next year. I also think that Big Ben can't throw a deep ball. He's got absolutely nowhere for an arm, which meant that he saw a higher percentage of loaded boxes than most other people. But you threw a couple of stats at us. I want to throw a couple of stats at you, okay? So in the top 7 running backs, Najee Harris had the lowest touchdown rate at 2.4. He had the lowest rushing yards per touchdown. Well, sorry, the highest in terms of he averaged 167 rushing yards per touchdown. To give you some context, that James Conner averaged 50 yards per touchdown. I also think that if you look at Najee Harris, it was ridiculous the amount of times he was getting hit in the backfield. He led the league in terms of evaded tackles per game. He averaged almost 5 evaded tackles per game. No other player was over 4.6. I think that there is supreme talent. I think that there is supreme talent. There is the volume, as we've seen. He gets involved in the passing game. He averaged almost a 15% target share. And I really think that this offense is going to take a step forward when it doesn't matter who comes in at quarterback. I think they're going to redress the offensive line because they've realised that is awful. And if you're going to tell me he's going to see an 8% opportunity share, he's going to see a 15% target share in this offense that has got, an improved quarterback, improved offensive line, and he's only going into his second year in the league, I'm fully in. Lewis, Lewis, what do you think?
I don't know. I'm quite suspect about the idea that it's going to be an improved offensive line and it's going to be an improved quarterback situation, because currently, we would assume they will address it in the draft, but that certainly doesn't mean that he'll be getting the same volume next year. If he gets a quarterback that's more willing to throw the ball down the field, then he's going to be getting a lower target share. The target share that we've seen at the moment it's mostly tends to be dump offs, so that target share is going to go down. And I think it's completely fair to say we will assume that they will put resources into the offensive line next year. But we don't know for certain that that's going to do anything. Just putting resource into something doesn't necessarily mean that it'll improve. And that's why I completely understand the argument. Like I really, really do. And potentially I need to do more film study on Najee myself to see the talent with my own eyes. I'm just a bit suspect about the offense going forwards, and I don't see him continuing with the same volume that he's had this year.
Okay, Liam, are you team Richard? Are you team Lewis? Where do you sit?
I hate to say it, but I'm team Richard.
I'm
coming from a film point of view rather than an analytics point of view, but from what I've seen on film, it backs up the analytic or the advanced analytics that Rich was using. He is a monster when he's trying to be tackled. You can't tackle him on your own. That's a bit of a generalization, but he looks so much better on tape than his stats show. And maybe you'll see that, maybe you'll disagree with my tape analysis, but keeping this sweet and short because we've got a lot of running backs and not enough time. I agree with Rich, but I do understand from a statistical point of view, looking at season-long stats, that he hasn't been impressive because of the amount of volume and the efficiency. But when that O-line, because even though you're trying not to predict that the O-line is going to improve, I want to predict it because if I'm right on that, I'm ahead of other people. If I'm wrong on that, then I don't know how much I actually lose on what I'm going to be paying for Najee. But I think with Najee, if that O-line improves as I expect it to, his advanced efficiency stats will shoot him up much higher in the season long stats, if that makes sense to you.
I suppose just one last comment on RJ this is a little bit Team Rich as opposed to Team Lewis. It's going to be hard for the O-line to get worse. So we're seeing him at the floor of what his production can look like behind an O-line.
Yeah, PFF have got him as the 25th best pass run blocking offensive line so far this year. It's pretty woeful. So the RB5 on the season, we'll try and speed this up as Liam says, but it was somewhat of a shock, shall we say, and that's Leonard Fournette. Lewis, he's an undrafted free agent at the end of this year. Do you think that the Bucks bring him back? Do you think we can, I guess, believe in Leonard Fournette as another, potential RB1 next year, or do you think it's a one-hit wonder?
I think if you own him in Dynasty, you wait for the Bucks to re-sign him, which I think they will, because I think they'll have one last ride with Tom Brady. And then I think the moment he's re-signed, you put him on the trade block and you see what you can get for him. I think he probably will perform next year, assuming he re-signs with the Bucks, because I think he's shown himself to be the only running back there that Tom Brady trusts, and I can't really see them drafting a running back when they know that this is probably coming towards the end of what they can expect from Brady. But yeah, I think, he's really, really outperformed all expectations from anyone this year. But I think if you own him, you wait for him to re-sign and then you sell him.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there, Lewis, except put him on the trade block. Don't do it. Be proactive, make offers. If you stick him on the trade block, you just get rubbish back. Liam, do you agree with us both?
Yes, I agree. With Fournette, as Lewis said, he exceeded everyone's expectations. I think with him, with his current current ADP of running back 27, as I spoke about last year in the offseason, with having a fluid draft for the first few rounds to see whether you want to transition more to a win now team or whether you want to transition more to a younger team. Fournette at that price is a perfect pivot option for you to pick up as a later round win now running back that could perform in your flex spot.
Yeah, if he's your RB3, you're absolutely laughing, isn't it? So the RB6 on the season, somewhat of a compiler, actually finished as the RB15 in points per game, and that was Ezekiel Elliott. Lewis, I know you traded him away in a league earlier this week. Are you all out on Zeke, or?
I own him in a couple of places, and I'm trying to sell him. But the worry is, if you're trying to sell Zeke now, you are at least a year too late on it. He's now got the perception that he is completely washed, and I think he still can perform for you. He has performed for me in a couple of places. I think you were very happy if you drafted Zeke this year. He was quite high floor, and I think Tony Pollard's increase in the offense is actually going to lead to him staying a little bit healthier maybe, and he definitely looks to get the goal line work. But I think you kind of have to be happy either taking like a late first, early second for Zeke, if that, or be happy with him retiring on your team at this point, because he's very, very hard to sell.
Yeah, I think that ship has sailed, as Lewis has said, and I actually really like Pollard coming into the season. Just wanted to pick up on that because you saw him get more usage this season, and I don't think anyone really expected the type of usage he was getting. And I think that can only increase as Zeke gets on to that later part of that contract.
Yeah, I think that, look, Zeke, we can talk about Zeke as much as you like, and I agree with you, Lewis, that I think would be a sell option, but I think the price has dropped too far. I think he's in that Derrick Henry mold of probably the last 2 years where it's you're not going to get a good return in selling him. So you've just got to accept that you're riding him out for the rest of his career. Yeah. He's got an $18 million cap hit next year, which, bearing in mind we were saying Austin Eckler is at 6.5, but his dead cap is $30 billion. So basically, I can guarantee this: the Dallas Cowboys aren't cutting Ezekiel Elliott next year. There's no way they're paying $30 million for him to not be on the team. In 2023, I mean, it's still tough. They can pay him $16 million, or they can free up $5 million by cutting him. So, look, Ezekiel Elliott is probably a low-end RB1, high-end RB2 next year. I think you've got to hold him. I think he's probably going to be a bit of a volume-based RB2 potentially next year, but I don't think you're going to get fair value in a trade. Perhaps the biggest breakout star of the year was RB7. Certainly one of mine and Liam's, I guess, best calls was, I think it was week 1 or week 2, going all in on him. And that was Cordarrelle Patterson. Lewis, do you think he can return any value next year? Do you think he's obviously a free agent? Do you think he re-signs with the Falcons? Or
I have absolutely no idea what to do with Cordarrelle Patterson. When I'm looking at my rankings, I just have him in a question mark box next to everything because I don't know what to do with him. I think he probably will re-sign with the Falcons and potentially without Mike Davis potentially being worked as their RB1 going forwards. Just because I think he's found a team finally that uses him the way he wants to actually be used. In my heart of hearts, I can't see him repeating just because I really didn't call it happening this year and I still don't really understand it. But there's no reason why he can't if he has the same workload going forwards. Obviously, Calvin Ridley hopefully coming back to the Falcons next year. The development of Kyle Pitts, you might find that a bit more space opens up for him, so maybe he can even improve next year. But if I owned Cordarrelle Patterson anyway, if he was my 20th round pick in a startup, I would have probably sold him midway through the season.
I wish I was in more league with you, Lewis. I'd have quite happily snapped him up in every single one of them. Liam, where are you at with Cordarrelle?
I'm very similar to Lewis. I have no idea where to rank him. He I suppose when you look at everyone's rankings, and if someone did this piece of work, which I doubt would ever happen, where you pull everyone that has Dynasty rankings together and do like an average, I'm sure that Cordarrelle Patterson would have the largest range within people's rankings because some people have him really high, some people have him really low. I have no idea where to put him.
If only there was a website like Fantasy Pros that did expert consensus rankings, Liam, and you could go and have a look, and it'll pull the average ranking.
Okay. I like your smart response. However, not everyone is on Fantasy Pros.
You can, in all seriousness, though, you can. I am going to go and do it after this pod. You can go and have a look at the Dynasty ranks on Fantasy Pros, and I'm intrigued to see. I'm going to get my maths wrong here, but he will have a. What is it? Will it be a wide mode? No, a wide standard deviation. That's it.
Yeah.
There you go. Trying to go back to my A-level stats days. I was all in on Cordarrelle Patterson this season. I thought he was a fantastic buy for a second early in the season, and he absolutely returned on that investment for me in multiple leagues. I'll be honest, at the price he's currently going at, so he's the RB35 in current ADP. He's my RB24. I am very happy to pay a second round pick for him. If I can get him for a second round pick, and I think certainly he's basically been put on the trade block in every single one of my leagues. I'm trying not to go all in on him just because I don't want too high share percentage. But I think wherever he ends up next year, I think he's going to return at least RB3 value, and for a second round pick, I'm absolutely doing that. I'd happily go and buy him for a second round pick in every single one of my leagues right now. So the RBA, it feels like we're in a little bit of a run of surprises, but it's another surprise. It was James Conner, hugely buoyed by a somewhat slightly ridiculous touchdown number, scored 14 rushing touchdowns, tied for second in the league. Do you think, again, another free agent, Lewis? Do you think he's someone we can believe in, or do you think it's a get what you can?
I think James Conner actually showed a bit more wriggle in the passing game this year than we knew from him previously. He'd been very much portrayed in the power back mold. He was someone I was actually really in on. Generally, if there's a committee, I will try and buy the cheaper back in that committee and hope that one takes over. So Melvin Gordon, I got really good value on in a few places. James Conner, I got really, really good value on in a few places. I can't necessarily see him continuing next year. I think he'll probably stay in Arizona. I think that makes sense. But yeah, I think I bought him in a few places midway through to contend for that second round pick, especially because he had a really bad name value going into the season, and he really, really returned on that.
Yeah. Liam, do you think the Cardinals bring him back for another go around, or?
I can see it happening, but I can't see the same finish happening. I struggle with him because RB1 is pretty much where I have him. I think if I had the choice between Patterson and Connor, I'd take Patterson. But Connor, realistically, that's where you're going to be paying for his value, because you have no idea what's going to happen next year. And we saw a lot of his production come from the few games where Chase Edmonds wasn't playing. The only thing I will say is Chase Edmonds is also an unrestricted free agent in 2022. So you could see Chase Edmonds brought back and James Conner told to go elsewhere, because they do like Edmonds. And I don't think that they'll bring both backs back next year.
Yeah, I think a lot will depend on price, won't it? Just to come back to you on the Cordero Patterson point, Liam. So his average ranking, dynasty ranking on Fantasy Pros is the RB43.
Oh wow!
Shockingly, I am the highest of all the rankers. He is the I have him at RB24, and the lowest ranker is RB65. So some 41 spots different in his ranking. That is, as you said, a very high standard deviation for his ranks. So the RB9 on the season was Aaron Jones. I know he had a decent start. He flashed certainly in the semi-final of your playoffs, I want to say, but in the final, AJ Dillon started to eat into that workload. I'm coming to you, Liam, first as our resident Packers fan. Do you think, if we've talked about it at length, that Aaron Jones has got 1 year left on his contract, on his real contract, compared to the 3 years on his kind of fake NFL contract? Do you think it's quickly get out before people realise that AJ Dillon's coming, or do you think it's too late?
Yeah, unfortunately, as much as I love Aaron Jones, the personality player, I think you've got to sell him this offseason. The sooner the better as well. That said, I think that in next year's redraft leagues, you can draft him as a top running back like you did this year. Yes, he probably disappointed based on where you drafted him, so maybe a little bit further back. But I think dynasty-wise, his drop is coming, and if I can get out now rather than in a year, I'm doing it, because Aaron Jones, he's shown that he's got the production and he's shown that he can still have a massive piece in that offense. But what do we see with the potential of Rodgers leaving or Tay leaving, and that's Devontae Adams? What do we see with a shift in that offense if anything like that happens? I think Aaron Jones specifically is someone that I'm selling if I can right now. If I can get good value, I'm not selling him for nothing, because his production next year is still going to be really good.
I think you've maybe missed the boat. I know we talked about it with a couple of others. I think you've maybe missed the boat if you're looking to sell. He's currently the RB17 in DLF ADP. I think, to me, that's too low to be trying to sell and get a return. I think I'm probably holding at that price. Lewis, do you think you have missed the boat, or are you one of these that's just trying to get anything you can because you think the AJ Dillon ship is coming?
I think your window to sell Aaron Jones was in the few weeks after he re-signed with the Packers, when everyone anticipated him leaving and everyone was buying AJ Dillon. I think the moment he re-signed, that was your window to sell him, even though he did produce this year, he will produce next year. The same, and this is the argument I'll make for your Zekes, for your Derrick Henrys, for your Aaron Jones. And we spoke about this in the last week, actually. I wouldn't try and sell them in the off-season. I would wait until mid-season when people remember how well they're actually producing and they're going to be valued slightly higher. People get very, very scared of aging running backs in the off-season. If you had tried to sell Derrick Henry in the off-season last year, you would have got very little. If you had tried to sell him in about week 4, you would have got a haul. I think you're not going to get the same level haul for Aaron Jones, but I think that's your answer if you want to get out of him.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Lewis, because that's precisely why I'm saying sell now. Is you're probably still catching people in a bit of a season mindset, and especially going into the playoffs where they're going to see Aaron Jones a lot more. And I can see him being a focal point of that offense more in the playoffs than he was in the past couple of weeks. That you might see a Cam Akers type boost, where Cam Akers last year, if you weren't watching, he had a massive boost from the last few weeks of the season and then the playoffs because he did really well, even though it was known that there was no points scored realistically for your fantasy team. So I think that's coming for Aaron Jones. So if you're selling in the next couple of weeks, you're probably getting more value than what you'll see in the offseason. But then if you're trying to sell in February, March, April time, you're a bit late on it, and you may as well wait until people, as Rich always says, goes back into a redraft mindset and is looking at Aaron Jones as a top production option.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I do think this is a guy that's traditionally been incredibly efficient from a touchdown perspective, and he really underperformed rushing the ball from a touchdown perspective. Now, yes, you can say that's because AJ Dillon ate into that work and scored a few touchdowns, but he only had a touchdown rate of 2.3. Now, that's lower than every other back we've already spoken about today. James Conner was up at like 7.2 or something. I think that it's a tough one. I think he's a hold for me because I think that, I am expecting AJ Dillon to get more work, but I do think that you're never going to get that return on the investment. And I do think that he's probably worth holding for one more year. I think he's in that same mold as Austin Eckler, as Ezekiel Elliott, that that you're not going to get what you should get in terms of the production in a trade. So you've just got to hold and ride him probably until he retires again, because unless you want to sell for what you probably get in a mid to late first, I think I'd still rather the player in that situation. A fantasy darling of many a team, the RB10 in points, but the RB7 in points per game, averaged over 18 points a game. Alvin Kamara. Lewis, do you think this is another aging running back that we're talking about potentially get out before the bottom falls out? Do you think you can still hold him?
This is more in the Austin Eckler mindset for me than it is in the Ezekiel Elliott mindset, just because of the way that Alvin Kamara is used. And I think we saw Kamara used in a very different way this year to what we've seen previously from him. There were quite a few games that he was really lacking in receptions and actually seeing much more rushing work than we've seen previously. And I don't think that will continue. I think that's just the nature of the talent that they had around him. I think with the weird situation of quarterback, missing Jameis Winston, obviously not having Michael Thomas, I think we saw Alvin Kamara having to just run the ball like a conventional running back. If he goes back to the Alvin Kamara of old, I think you'll probably see another good couple of years out of him.
Yeah, absolutely. Liam, are you in still on Alvin Kamara?
Yeah, I've got Alvin Kamara. I think, we've all got him as the RB4 in our Dynasty rankings. I quite like him going into the year, into next year as well. I think if you're trying to sell him now, again, the ship has sailed maybe a little bit, especially with the uncertainty at quarterback.
The most rushing attempts of his career this year, and he only played 12 games.
Yeah, wow, that's a cracking stat. I like that. So the RB11, I think this is, dare I say it, buoyed massively by the fact he played a lot of games. He was the RB19 in points per game. I think it shows that there was basically a top 7 or 8 in terms of points per game, and then a big kind of tier from about RB8 down to about RB24. But he was the RB11 in terms of how he finished, and that's Antonio Gibson. A lot of people are dreaming of that week 1 usage where he's getting all the targets, he's getting all the work. Lewis, do you think that the hype kind of outweighed the production again? Do you think he's going to potentially hit on that next year, or do you think he's just going to be one of these that holds out hope and never delivers?
I think we're seeing a Joe Mixon level sort of for Antonio Gibson in terms of someone that was very hyped up in terms of talent, and we do know the talent is there, but the situation just letting him down a little bit. I mean, obviously the Joe Mixon of a few years ago, not the Joe Mixon of this year. Antonio Gibson was someone I really liked coming into the season, aside from Jonathan Taylor, Deandre Schwift as well, injury aside. Those really highly touted second-year running backs had a bit of a down year to what we anticipated. It's not an offense that I particularly like, especially with uncertainty going into next year in the quarterback situation. And I'm also not particularly confident in the coaching. He's not... I think he's a player that I'm going to try and get value for now, because I think the hype is still sort of around him. I think you can still get kind of a top 12 running back. I think Antonio Gibson as your running back 2 might be fine going forwards, but I think you can do better. And I think whenever a running back has a little bit of hype around them, you can normally get that production plus elsewhere.
Yeah, Lewis.
Has Rich disappeared?
We've lost Rich.
Okay. Not quite sure where Rich was going with that, but I'll jump in on
Liam,
Antonio Gibson.
What do you think?
Okay, so Antonio, me personally, I think he's not too far off Austin Eckler's value right now, which I think is absolutely crazy. So if you can trade a Gibson for an Eckler, especially as you're running back 2, that's the sort of move I'm trying to make. I think with Gibson, as Lewis has mentioned, his hype is probably a bit too high compared to his production over the past year. As I'm not sure whether you mentioned, Rich, he's the running back 19 in points per game, and he finishes the RB11. That's the sort of running back I don't want on my team. I struggle with him, and I'm the lowest out of all us 3, with him ranked as my RB 14 in Dynasty. I do think that he can improve, especially with a better quarterback this year. Sorry, Rich, Taylor Heilicke. Yes, you were saying that he's a great value. I'm always going to rip you just to see you.
I love that me being right on Taylor Heinicke being a fantastic fantasy ad before the season has now turned into what? This is a guy that you could get for free and produced, what was it, 14, 15 games of relevant fantasy production. And apparently now I'm the biggest Taylor Heinicke fan who thinks he's better than Patrick Mahomes. I've never said that.
He was your QB3 coming into the year. It was ridiculous.
I said he was a great fantasy ad. I never said anything. I said he was better than Ryan Fitzpatrick. That was all I ever said. For me, I think I agree kind of what you're saying. I'm a little bit concerned about Antonio Gibson, but I think he's such like a Twitter darling. He's one of these that gets overhyped massively. JD McKissic is a free agent this year. I think if Washington don't re-sign JD McKissic, you're going to have, that's your sell window. I think if Washington come out of free agency with no competition, come out of the draft with no competition to Antonio Gibson, that's when people are going to start talking about, right, Antonio Gibson, the 3-down back, he's going to get all the work share. He's going to get 70, 75% opportunity share. That's when you sell him, because I think that he's one of these that just seems to get overhyped and get people almost too excited. So the final running back, I guess we're gonna do a bit of a dive into the ultimate volume-based RB2. Josh Jacobs shockingly finished as an RB1 yet again. I think that's 3 years on the trot. He's scraped in as a top 12 running back. He was averaged only 14.5 points a game. Lewis, are you just one of these that's happy with Josh Jacobs as your RB2, or is he just not a sexy enough name for you?
I'm fine with Josh Jacobs as my RB3. In fact, I'm very happy with him as my RB3. And he's actually been a favourite piece of mine to either tide me over with some stability in terms of just, he's going to get the workload. Although actually quite a few times, there'll always be players, say your Dallas Goederts and your Zach Ertz's, that you watch and you go, which of these two is it? I don't know which it is. We had that quite a few times this year that you go, oh, I'm relying on Josh Jacobs. Oh, that's a great Oh, that was Peyton Barber. Fantastic. So maybe he's not got that same workload, but I'm happy with him as my RB3. It's such a low upside player that it's not really the way that I tend to like to play, because I don't know, unless he's going to get 3 touchdowns, which he has done a couple of times. I don't see what the upside is for him week to week. I don't think he's going to win your weeks by himself. He might not lose them because he probably has an 8-point floor, but it's not the kind of player that I like to buy in Dynasty. In fact, I sold him earlier this season.
And Liam, I've done that about 4 times this pod. I did it the same time. I did it when you were both on the pod last time. We need to get writers that don't have names that are similar. I'm going to ban it. Liam, do you think that going into the final year of his contract, obviously he's potentially got that 5th year option, do you think that he's a decent kind of steady Eddie to stick on your roster, or are you looking for something a little bit sexier?
I think, as Lewis said, if you're a contender going for a championship and you need a bye-week filler, you can do a lot worse than Josh Jacobs.
Bye-week filler? That's harsh.
I mean, the way that I see it is if you have 2 top-end running backs or 2 top 24 running backs, and you can get Josh Jacobs as a flex option that then will cover you in bye weeks, perfect. But I hate him. Not the person. I hate the play of having him in fantasy football because of what Lewis has said. Although he can score 3 touchdowns, it's very unlikely. You're probably not getting the passing work. We
can hold out hope for that Washington.
Richard.
We can hold out hope for that Washington game where he got, was it 9 receptions against Washington, wasn't it? It was ridiculous.
But you've had Jalen Richard brought in, you've had Kenyon Drake been signed to a decently sized contract to do that sort of thing. I don't think that Josh Jacobs has that upside. And he's the only player that I can think of that would actually have, I would say, would have a downturn in value by having his 5th year option picked up by the Raiders.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, he's just not sexy, is he? Here's a quiz question for you both then. He played in, I presume, 16 games. He played in 14 games. How many weeks do you think he finished as a top 12 back this season?
6.
3.
It was 2.
Oh, I had way too high.
He had 2 top 12 weeks, but he did have 11 weeks as a top 24 back. He is the epitome of a volume-based RB2. And normally that's a guy that I don't want to roster anywhere, because I think that for the price you have to pay, you can replace that production with 5 or 6 backs off your bench and play the kind of the stream approach with those guys. However, the price is ridiculous. This is a guy that, as I said, I think he's now had 3 top 12 seasons through his career. He's the RB20 in ADP. And don't get me wrong, I'm lower than that on him. He's my RB26. But I think if you can get him for a second, if you can get him for a high seconds, I'm doing that 10 times out of 10. I'd probably potentially pay a late. It would have to be very late, late first. But yeah, I think he's, as you said, he's just not a sexy name, is he? So then just to finish us off then, guys. So we had 5 kind of honourable mentions. They were inside the top 12 in terms of points per game, but because of injuries and a range of issues, didn't play a full season, so therefore didn't get enough points to be in the top 12. So Derrick Henry, he was the RB1 in terms of points per game. Obviously only played in 8 games. Christian McCaffrey was the RB5. Nick Chubb was the RB9. Dalvin Cook was the RB11 in points per game, and Deandre Schwift was the RB12. So, Lewis, I'm going to come to you first. Is there any of those 5 that kind of jump out to you as, I guess, noteworthy or anything to comment on?
So, for me, those are actually interesting. They are all top 12 options in my rankings. Christian McCaffrey is the one which is obviously a really interesting one to talk about. Will we see, is Christian McCaffrey injury prone now? Is this his career? Will we see him get back to that level? And if you're going to buy him now, can you essentially get an unbelievably cheap 1-year rental RB1 if he stays healthy, because we know the talent is clearly still there. It's just injury issues. Derrick Henry, again, is an interesting one that I said in quite a lot of places when Derrick Henry was having an MVP level start to the season, and it was unbelievable. That's your window to sell him, because we all knew the moment he had any sort of injury, even if it was a tiny one, the entire community was just going to be terrified by that. It's what we'd been fearing the whole time, even if it looks like he's going to be back relatively soon. But you're waiting for a player with that level of workload to break down. And the moment it happened, even if it's not a particularly scary injury, it's just going to change the perception on him.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by Derrick Henry. I wonder if there's a sneaky little buy window right now. If the Titans, if they do potentially lock up the playoff bye week, the number 1 seed, and it's another week for him to recover before he then plays in that divisional round in the playoffs. And if we could see Derrick Henry have a ridiculous 3-game stretch, potentially lead the Titans to a Super Bowl, is his price then going to completely skyrocket and people go, this is a potential RB1? So if I'm a complete contender going into next year, I'm kicking the tires on Derrick Henry. Not paying over the odds, but I'm definitely intrigued. Liam, is there any there that you think are potentially worthy of conversation?
Yeah, I really wanted to talk about Deandre Schwift because I was really surprised by his RB12 points per game finish. I thought he was going to be a little bit higher than that. And then I just worked out that if you exclude the one game where he played 20% of snaps, or just under 20% of snaps, and put that into his final season-long score into the full window of games, you're looking at an RB, there's 10. I think he would be around the RB8, or about the RB8, RB9 in points per game. I think with Swift, you've already seen the jump for him. So I know that we all have him as our running back too in Dynasty rankings. So you have seen that jump for him. But maybe we're a little bit too high on him. I wanted to put that out there because if we've all got him as our running back too, we have no idea what the Lions are going to do next year. With Goff, yes, maybe they keep him on, but if they don't, what are we going to see with his usage with the running backs? What happens when the wide receiver core gets a lot better? I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown has put on a little bit of a show to end the season. And yes, Rich, unfortunately, day 3 picks do matter in that case.
Nope.
I mean, they have mattered for the fantasy playoffs, and I'm sure a lot of people would have been happy with spending a 3rd or a 4th round pick on him to win a title.
To be fair, I'll hold my hands up and admit that he helped me win a title. I did have 1 share, and I did win the title in that league. So yeah.
Tut. Day 3 picks do matter by the sounds of it, then, Rich. But yeah, Deandre Schwift, I think we could be a little bit too high on him. But that said, I think that I have him in a tier with Najee right now. And as you said earlier, the running back 4 in Dynasty rankings is probably the hardest running back spot to rank. I think running back 2 and 3 could also be put up there because you could basically switch Najee Harris and Deandre Schwift around for a lot of people. I know Lewis has Christian McCaffrey as the RB3. So I think that's just a really awkward place to try and rank right now. And anyone that says otherwise, I think is lying to you.
Yeah, I think for me, my Swift ranking is a couple of things. I think one, I completely believe in the talent. I think he's a top 3 talent at the running back.
I love the
position
talent.
in the
Don't
NFL.
get me
I
wrong.
think he's incredible. I think that offensive line, they've shown, with the Penei Sewell pick, they've now got 2 elite tackles. Penei Sewell had some question marks after week 1 or 2, but he's completely turned it around and he's looked fantastic through the season. I think they're going to continue to invest in that offensive line. And the kind of third point is, everybody talks about Deandre Schwift being in a timeshare. Everybody talks about Deandre Schwift potentially having to share work with Jamal Williams and all that kind of thing. Well, Jamal Williams is, I don't want to say definitely, but could potentially be cut at the end of the year. I don't think people quite realise that. The Lions could save $3 million by moving on from him, which doesn't sound a lot, but when they're only paying him $4 million, that's quite a big chunk. I don't know if he's done enough to warrant being paid $4 million next year. So, yeah, Deandre Schwift, yes, he was, would you say he was the RB12 currently? He only had a 57% opportunity share. If we start to see that ticking up into the mid-60s, if we start seeing that offensive line improve, if we see the offense as a whole improve, some more red zone opportunities, then yeah, I'm really hopeful that he's going to start paying back. Certainly as a guy that has a lot of shares, I really hope that he does end up paying back that RB2 to price. So that kind of rounds us out quite nicely. Lewis, thank you ever so much for coming on. It's great to get you back on for your Matchball pod. Where can the listeners find you? Where can they read all your work and listen to you talk?
Yeah, absolutely pleasure to always come on and talk to you guys. I'm on Twitter at LewisWoodFF_UK. You can always find me writing at 5 Yard. I'm going to be doing a lot of things in the off season. I've got some good plans for the kind of content that I'm looking to produce. And as a predominantly dynasty-based analyst, this is really the time when all the redraft analysts go, time for a break. And us three rub our hands together and look forward to doing even more work. So
exciting times. Well, thank you ever so much for coming on. It's been fantastic. Liam, I believe you've got some exciting playoff leagues. For those people that aren't quite done yet with fantasy football, Liam's got their dangling the carrot for you.
So yeah, as I mentioned last week, I run playoffs leagues every year. I've spoken with Murph, and Murph has launched some leagues, playoff leagues from the 5 Yard Rush Twitter handle. So if you are looking for some leagues there, they're going to be supporting a charity. So I believe you have to donate a little bit. It won't be much, probably like $5. Probably around £3, and you can get into one of those for free, or I will be running paid playoff leagues, so you'll be winning a cash prize at the end. The other thing I wanted to say, Rich, was congratulations to Phil from the Dynasty Listener League. He has run away with the championship. Absolutely great performance from everyone. But again, guys, keep your eyes out on the at 5 Yard Dynasty Twitter handle. We will be looking for replacements in the next couple of weeks, because that league replaces the bottom 6 or the bottom 5 this year, because me and Rich did terribly in it.
I forget every week you say you want to mention the listener league, and every week I forget about it, because I'll be honest, I wrote off that league about week 3 when I realised how terrible our team was. I'm like, yeah, okay, that one's forgotten about. But yeah, no, thank you ever so much for coming on, Lewis. Liam, another great show. We'll be back next week with a wide receiver dynasty review, and another. You'll get the 4th part of the 5 Yard Dynasty team, and it'll be another great pod. So have a great week all, and we'll see you again next week.